Bridge to Terabithia, Chapter 7, The Golden Room. Mr. Burke had begun to repair the old Perkins place. After Christmas, Mrs. Burke was right in the middle of writing a book, so she wasn't available to help, which left Leslie the jobs of hunting and fetching. For all his smartness with politics and music, Mr. Burke was inclined to be absent-minded. He would put down the hammer to pick up a how-to book, and then lose the hammer between there and the project he was working on. Leslie was good at finding things for him, and he liked her company as well. When she came home from school and on the weekends, he wanted her around. Leslie explained all of this to Jess. Jess tried going to Terabithia alone, but it was no good. It needed Leslie to make the magic. He was afraid that he would destroy everything by trying to force the magic on his own, when it was plain that the magic was reluctant to come for him. If he went home, either his mother was after him to do some chore, or Maybelle wanted him to play Barbie. Lord, he wished a million times he'd never helped buy that stupid doll. He'd no more than lie down on the floor to paint than Maybelle would be up after him to put an arm back on or snap up a dress. Joyce Ann was worse. She got a devilish delight out of sitting smack down on his rump when he was stretched out working. If he yelled at her to get off of him, she'd stick her index finger in the corner of her mouth and holler, which would, of course, crank up his mother. "Jessie Oliver, you leave that baby alone. What you mean lying there in the middle of the floor doing nothing anyway? Didn't I tell you I couldn't cook supper before you chopped wood for the stove?" Sometimes he would sneak down to the old Perkins place and find Prince Terrian crying on the porch where Mr. Burke had exiled him. You couldn't blame the man. No one could get anything done with that animal grabbing his hand or jumping up to lick his face. He'd take PT for a romp in the Burke's upper field if it was midday. Miss Bessie would be mooing nervously from across the fence. She couldn't seem to get used to the yipping and snapping. Or maybe it was the time of year, the last dregs of winter spoiling the taste of everything. Nobody, human or animal, seemed happy. Except for Leslie. She was crazy about fixing up that broken-down old wreck of a house. She loved being needed by her father. Half the time they were supposed to be working, they were just yakking away. She was learning. She related glowingly at recess to understand her father. It had never occurred to Jess that parents were meant to be understood any more than the safe at the Millsburg First National was sitting around begging him to crack it open. Parents were what they were. It wasn't up to you to try to puzzle them out. There was something weird about a grown man wanting to be friends with his own child. He ought to have been friends with someone his own age and let her have her own friends. Jess's feelings about Leslie's father poked up like a canker sore. You keep biting it, and it gets bigger and worse instead of better. You spend a lot of time trying to keep your teeth away from it. Then, sure as Christmas, you forget the silly thing and chomp right down on it. Lord, that man got in his way. It even poisoned what time he did have with Leslie. She'd be sitting there bubbling away at recess, and it would be almost like the old times. Then, without warning, she'd say, "Bill thinks so-and-so." Chomp, right down on the old sore. Finally, she noticed. It took her until February, and for a girl as smart as Leslie, that was a long, long time. "Why don't you like Bill?" "Who said I didn't?" "Jess Aarons, how stupid do you think I am?" "Pretty stupid sometimes." But what he actually said was, "What makes you think I don't like him?" "Well, you never come over to the house anymore. At first, I thought it was something I had done, but that's not it. You still talk to me at school. Lots of times I see you in the field playing with PT, but you don't even come near the door. You're always busy." He was uncomfortably aware of how much he sounded like Brenda when he said this. Well, for spaghetti sauce, you could offer to help, you know." It was like all the lights coming back on after an electrical storm. Lord, who was the stupid one now? Still, It took him a few days to feel comfortable around Leslie's father. Part of the problem was that he didn't know what to call him. "Hey," he'd say, and both Leslie and her father would turn around. Mr. Burke?" "I wish you'd call me Bill, Jess." "Yeah." He fumbled around with the name for a couple of more days, but it came more easily with practice. It also helped to know some things that Bill, for all his brains and books, didn't know. Jess found he was really useful to him, not a nuisance to be tolerated or set out on the porch like PT. "You're amazing," Bill would say. Where did you learn that, Jess?" Jess never quite knew where he learned things from. So he'd shrug and let Bill and Leslie praise him to each other, though the work itself was praise enough. First, they ripped out the boards that covered the ancient fireplace, coming upon the rusty bricks like prospectors upon the motherlode. Next, they got the old wallpaper off the living room wall, all 5 garnished layers of it. Sometimes they lovingly patched and painted. As they lovingly patched and painted, they listened to Bill's records or sang. Leslie and Jess teaching Bill some of Miss Edmond's songs, and Bill teaching them some that he knew. At other times, they would talk. Jess listened wonderingly as Bill explained things that were going on in the world. If Mama could hear him, she'd swear he was another Walter Cronkite instead of just some hippie. All the Burkes were smart. Not smart maybe about fixing things or growing things, but smart in a way that Jess had never known real live people to be. Like one day, while they were working, Judy came down and read out loud to them, mostly poetry and some of it in Italian, which of course Jess couldn't understand. But he buried his head in the rich sound of the words and let himself be wrapped warmly around the feel of the Burke's brilliance. They painted the living room gold. Leslie and Jess wanted blue, but Bill held out for gold, which turned out to be so beautiful they were glad they had given in. The sun would slant in from the west in the late afternoon until the room was brim full of light. Finally, Bill rented a sander from Millsburg Plaza, and they took off the black floor paint down to the wide oak boards and refinished them. "No rugs," Bill said. "No," agreed Judy. "That would be like putting a veil on the Mona Lisa." When Bill and the children had finished razor blading the last bits of the paint off the windows and washed the panes, they called Judy down from her upstairs study to come and see. The 4 of them sat down on the floor and gazed around. It was gorgeous. Leslie gave a deep, satisfied sigh. "I love this room," she said. "Don't you feel the golden enchantment of it?" "It is worthy to be," Jess looked up in sudden alarm, "in a palace." Relief. In such a mood, a person might even let a sworn secret slip. But she hadn't. Not even to Bill and Judy, and he knew how she felt about her parents. She must have seen his anxiety because she winked at him across Bill and Judy, just as he sometimes winked at Maybelle over Joyce Ann's head. Terabithia was still just for the 2 of them. The next afternoon, they called PT and headed for Terabithia. It had been more than a month since they had been there together, and as they neared the creek bed, they slowed down. Jess wasn't sure he still remembered how to be a king. We've been away for many years," Leslie was saying. "How do you suppose the kingdom has fared in our absence?" "Where have we been?" "Conquering the hostile savages on our northern borders." "But the lines of communication have been broken, and thus we do not have tidings of our beloved homeland for many a full moon." How was that for a regular queen talk? Jess wished that he could match it. "You think anything bad has happened?" "We must have courage, my king. It may indeed be so." They swung silently across the creek bed. On the farther bank, Leslie picked up 2 sticks. "Thy sword, sire," she whispered. Jess nodded. They hunched down and crept toward the stronghold like police detectives on TV. "Hey, Queen, watch out, behind you!" Leslie whirled and began to duel with the imaginary foe. Then more came rushing upon them, and the shouts of battle rang through Terabithia. The guardian of the realm raced about in happy puppy circles, too young yet to comprehend the danger that surrounded them all. "They've sounded the retreat," the brave queen cried. "Yay! Drive them out utterly, so they may never return to prey upon our people. Out you go, out, out!" All the way to the creek bed, they forced the enemy back, sweating under their winter jackets. At last, Terabithia is free once more. The king sat down on a log and wiped his face, but the queen did not let him rest for long. "Sire, we must go at once to the grove of pines and give thanks for our victory." Jess followed her into the grove, where they stood silently in the dim light. "Who do we thank?" he whispered. The question flickered across her face. "Oh, God," she began. She was more at home with the magic than religion. Oh God, oh spirits of the grove. Thy right arm hast given us the victory." He couldn't remember where he'd heard that one, but it seemed to fit. Leslie gave him a look of approval. She took up the words. "Now grant protection to Terabithia, to all its people, and to its rulers." Arr! Jess tried hard not to smile. "And to its puppy dog. And to Prince Tarian, its guardian and jester. Amen." Amen. They both managed somehow to keep the giggles buttoned in until they got out of the sacred place. A few days after the encounter with the enemies of Terabithia, they had an encounter of a different sort at school. Leslie came out at recess to tell Jess that she had started into the girls' room only to be stopped by the sound of crying from one of the stalls. She lowered her voice. "This sounds crazy, but from the feet, I'm sure it's Janice Avery in there." "You're kidding." The picture of Janice Avery crying on the toilet seat was too much for Jess to imagine. "Well, she's the only one in school that has Willard Hughes's name crossed out on her sneakers. Besides, the smoke is so thick in there you need a gas mask." "Are you sure she was crying?" "Jess Aarons, I can tell if someone is crying or not." Lord, what was the matter with him? Janice Avery had given him nothing but trouble, and now he was feeling responsible for her, like one of the Burke's Timberwolves or the Beached Whales. She didn't even cry when the kids teased her about Willard after the note. "Yeah, I know." He looked at her. "Well, what should we do?" "Do? What do you mean, what should we do?" How could he explain it to her? "Leslie, if she was an animal predator, we'd be obliged to help her." Leslie gave him a funny look. "Well, you're the one who's always going on and telling me I gotta care. But Janice Avery? If she's crying, there's gotta be something really wrong." "Well, what's your plan?" "I can't go into no girl's room." "Oh, I get it. You're gonna send me into the shark's jaws." "No, thank you, Mr. Aarons." "Leslie, I swear, I'd go in there if I could." He really thought he would, too. "You ain't scared of her, are you?" He didn't mean it in a daring way. He was just dumbfounded by the idea of Leslie being scared. She flashed her eyes at him and tossed her head back in that proud way she had. "Okay, I'm going in, but I want you to know, Jess Aarons, I think this is the dumbest idea you've ever had in your life." He crept down the hall after her and hid behind the nearest alcove to the girls' room door. He ought at least be there to catch her when Janice kicked her out. There was a quiet minute after the door swung shut behind Leslie. Then he heard Leslie saying something to Janice. Next, a string of cuss words which were too loud to be blurred by the closed door. This was followed by some loud sobbing. Not Leslie's, thank the Lord. And some sobbing and talking mixed up. And then the bell. He couldn't be caught staring at the door to the girls' room, but how could he leave? He'd be deserting in the line of fire. The rush of kids into the building settled it. He let himself be caught up in the stream and made his way to the basement steps. his brain still swirling with the sounds of cussing and sobbing. Back in the 5th grade classroom, he kept his eyes glued on the door for Leslie. He half expected to see her coming through, flat and straight out like the coyote on Roadrunner. But she came in smiling, without so much as a black eye. She waltzed over to Mrs. Myers and whispered her excuse for being late, and Mrs. Myers beamed at her with what was becoming known as the Leslie Burke special. How was he supposed to find out what had happened? If he tried to pass a note, the other kids would read it. Leslie sat way up in the front corner, nowhere near the wastebasket or the pencil sharpener, so there was no way he could pretend to be heading somewhere else and sneak in a word with her. And she wasn't moving in his direction, that was for sure. She was sitting straight up in her seat, looking as pleased with herself as a motorcycle rider who just made it over 14 trucks. Leslie smirked clear through the afternoon and right on to the bus where Janice Avery gave her a little crooked smile on the way to the back seat. And Leslie looked over at Jess as if to say, "See?" He was going crazy wanting to know. She even put him off after the bus pulled away, pointing her head at Maybelle as if to say, "We shouldn't discuss it in front of the children." Finally, in the safe darkness of the stronghold, she told him. "Do you know why she was crying?" "Well, how am I supposed to know that? Lord, Leslie, would you tell me already? What in the heck was going on in there?" "Janice Avery is a very unfortunate person. Do you realize that?" "What was she crying about, for heaven's sake?" "It's a very complicated situation. I can understand now why Janice has so many problems relating to people." "Will you tell me what happened before I have a hernia?" "Did you know her father beats her?" "Lots of kids' fathers beat them. Will you get on with it?" "No, I mean he really beats her. The kind of beatings they would take people to jail for in Arlington." She shook her head in disbelief. "You can't imagine." "Is that why she was crying? Just because her father beats on her?" "Oh, no, she gets beaten up all the time. She wouldn't cry at school about that." "Well, then what was she crying for?" "Well," Lord, Leslie was loving this. She'd string him along forever. "Well, today she was so mad about her father that she told her so-called friends Wilma and Bobby Sue about it." "Yeah? And those two, she looked for a word vile enough to describe Janice Avery's friends and found none. "Those 2 girls blabbed it all over the 7th grade. Pity for Janice Avery swept across him. "Even the teacher knows about it." Boy, the word came out like a sigh. There was a rule at Lark Creek, more important than anything Mr. Turner made up or fussed about. That was the rule that you never mixed up troubles at home with life at school. When parents were poor or ignorant or mean or even just didn't believe in having a TV set, it was up to their kids to protect them. By tomorrow, every kid and teacher in Lark Creek Elementary would be talking in half snickers about Janice Avery's daddy. It didn't matter if their own fathers were in the state hospital or the federal prison. They hadn't betrayed theirs, and Janice had. Do you know what else? What? I told Janice about not having a TV and everyone laughing. I told her I understood what it was like to have everyone think you were weird. And what'd she say to that? Well, she knew I was telling the truth. She even asked me for advice, as if I were Dear Abby. Yeah? I told her just pretend that she didn't know what on earth Wilma and Bobby Sue had said, or they had gotten such a crazy story, and everybody would forget about it in a week. She leaned forward, suddenly anxious. Do you think that was good advice? Lord, how should I know? Make her feel better? I think so. She seemed to feel a lot better. Well, then I guess it was great advice. She leaned back, happy and relaxed. You know what, Jess? What? Thanks to you, I think I now have 1.5 friends at Lark Creek School. It hurt him for it to mean so much to Leslie to have friends. When would she learn that they weren't worth her trouble? Oh, you got more friends than that. Nope, 1.5. Monster Mouth Myers doesn't count. There, in their secret place, his feelings bubbled inside of him like a stew on the back of the stove. Some sad for her in her lonesomeness, but chunks of happiness too. To be able to be Leslie's one whole friend in the world, as she was his, he couldn't help being satisfied about that. That night, as he started to get to bed, leaving the light off, so as not to wake the little girls, he was surprised by Maybelle's shrill little, "Jess, how come you're still awake?" "Jess, I know where you and Leslie go to hide." "What do you mean?" "I followed you." He was at her bedside in one leap. "You ain't supposed to follow me." "How come?" He grabbed her shoulders and made her look at him in the face. She blinked in the dim light, and like a startled chicken. "You listen here, Maybelle Aarons. I catch you following me again, your life ain't worth nothing." Okay. She slid back into bed. "Boy, you're mean. I ought to tell Mama on you." "Look, Maybelle, you can't do that. You can't tell Mama about where me and Leslie go." She answered with a little sniffling sound. He grabbed her shoulders again. He was desperate. "I mean it, Maybelle. You can't tell nobody nothing." He let her go. "Now, I don't want to hear about you following me or squealing on me to Mama ever again. You understand me?" "Why not?" "Because if you do, I'm going to tell Billie Jean Edwards you still wet the bed sometimes." "Yo, you wouldn't." "Boy, girl, you better not try me." He made her swear on the Bible never to tell, and never to follow him again. But still, he laid there awake for a long time. How could he trust everything that mattered to him to a sassy little 6-year-old? Sometimes it seemed to him that his life was delicate as a dandelion. One little puff from any direction, and it would get blown to bits. Chapter 8. Easter. Even though it was nearly Easter, there were still very few nights that it was warm enough to leave Miss Bessie out. And then there was the rain. All March it poured. For the first time in many years, the creek bed held water. Not just a trickle either. Enough so that when they swung across, it was a little scary looking down at the rushing water below. Jess took Prince Terrian across inside his jacket. But the puppy was growing so fast, he might pop the zipper any time and fall into the water and drown. Ellie and Brenda were already fighting about what they were going to wear to church. Since Mama got mad at the preacher 3 years back, Easter was the only time in the year that the Aarons went to church, and it was a big deal. His mother always cried poor, but she put a lot of thought and as much money as she could scrape together into making sure she wouldn't be embarrassed by how her family looked. But the day before she planned to take them all to Millsburg Plaza for new clothes, his dad came home from Washington early. He'd been laid off. No new clothes this year. A wail went up from Ellie and Brenda like two sirens going to a fire. "You can't make me go to church," Brenda said. "I ain't got nothing to wear and you know it." "Just because you're too fat," Maybelle muttered. "Did you hear what she said, Mama? I'm going to kill her for that." "Brenda, will you shut your mouth?" her mother said sharply. Then more wearily, "We got more than Easter clothes to worry about." His dad got up noisily and poured himself a cup of black coffee from the pot on the stove. "Why can't we just charge some things?" Ellie said in her wheedling voice. Brenda burst in. "Do you know what some people do? They charge something and wear it, and then they take it back and say it didn't fit or something. The stores don't give them no trouble." Her father turned in kind of a roar. "I never heard such a fool thing in my life. Didn't you hear your mother tell you to shut your mouth, girl?" Brenda stopped talking, but she popped her gum as loudly as she could just to prove that she wasn't going to be put down. Jess was glad to escape the shed and the complacent company of Miss Bessie. There was a knock. "Jess? Leslie, come on in." She looked first, then sat on the floor near his stool. What's new? What's new? Lord, don't ask. He tugged rhythmically at Miss Bessie and listened to the plink, plink, plink in the bottom of the pail. That bad, huh? Yeah, my dad's got laid off, and Brenda and Ellie are trying to fry because they can't have new clothes for Easter. Geez, I'm sorry to hear that. How about your dad, I mean? Jess grinned. Yeah, I ain't too worried about those girls. If I know them, they'll trick new clothes out of somebody. It would make you throw up to see how those girls make a spectacle of themselves in church. I never knew you went to church. Only on Easter. He concentrated on the warm udders. I guess you probably think that's dumb or something. She didn't answer for a minute. Actually, I was thinking I'd like to go. He stopped milking. I don't understand you sometimes, Leslie. Well, I've never been to a church before. It'd be a new experience for me. You'd hate it, he said, going back to work. Why? It's boring. Well, I'd just like to go and see for myself. Do you think your parents would let me go with you? You're not allowed to wear pants. I've got some dresses, Jess Aarons. Would wonder never cease? All right, here, open your mouth. Why? Just open your mouth. For once she obeyed, he sent a stream of warm milk straight into it. Jess Aarons! The name was garbled and the milk dribbling down her chin as she spoke. Don't open your mouth now, you're wasting good milk. Leslie started to giggle, choking and coughing. Now if I could just learn to pitch a baseball that straight. Let me try again. Leslie controlled her giggle, closed her eyes, and solemnly opened her mouth. But now, Jess was giggling, so he couldn't keep his hand steady. You dunce, you got me right in the ear. Leslie hunched up her shoulder and rubbed at her ear with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. She collapsed into giggles again. I'd be obliged if you finish milking and come on back to the house. His dad was standing right there at the door. I guess I'd better go, said Leslie quietly. She got up and went to the door. Excuse me. His dad moved aside to let her pass. Jess waited for him to say something more, but he just stood there for a few minutes and then turned and went out. Ellie said that she would go to church if Mama would let her wear the see-through blouse, and Brenda would go if she at least got a new skirt. In the end, everyone got something new except for Jess and his dad, neither of whom cared. But Jess got the idea that it might give him a little bargaining power with his mother. Since I ain't getting anything new, could Leslie go to church with us? That girl? He could see his mother rooting around in her head for a good reason to say no. She doesn't dress right. Mama, Leslie's got dresses. She's got hundreds of them. His mother's thin face drooped. She bit the outside of her bottom lip in a way that Joyce Ann sometimes did, and spoke so softly Jess could hardly hear her. I don't want anyone poking up their nose at this family. Jess wanted to put his arm around her the way he put it around Maybelle when she needed comfort. She don't poke up her nose at you, Mama. Honest. His mother sighed. Well, if she can promise to look decent. Leslie did look decent. Her hair was kind of slicked down, and she wore a navy blue jumper over a blouse with tiny old-fashioned looking flowers. At the bottom of her red knee socks were a pair of shiny brown leather shoes that Jess had never seen before, as Leslie always wore sneakers, like the rest of the kids at Lark Creek. Even her manner was decent. Her usual sparkle was toned way down, and she said yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, to his mother, just as though she were aware of Mrs. Aaron's dread of disrespect. Jess knew how hard Leslie must be trying, for Leslie didn't say ma'am naturally. She said yes'm and no'm. In comparison to Leslie, Brenda and Ellie looked like a pair of peacocks with fake tail feathers. They both insisted on riding in the front of the pickup with their parents, which was some kind of a squeeze with Brenda's shape to consider. Jess and Leslie and the little girls climbed happily into the back, and sat down on old sacks his dad had put against the cab. The sun wasn't exactly shining, but it was the first day in so long that the rain wasn't actually coming down, that they sang, "Oh Lord, what a morning! Ah, lovely meadows," and "Sing, Sing a Song" that Miss Edmonds had taught them, and even Jingle Bells for Joyce Ann. The wind carried their voices away from them. It made the music seem mysterious, which filled Jess with a feeling of power over the hills rolling out from behind the truck. The ride was much too short, especially for Joyce Ann, who began to cry because the arrival interrupted the first verse of Santa Claus is Coming to Town, which came after Jingle Bells. It was her favorite song. Jess tickled her to get her giggling again, so that when the four of them clambered down over the tailgate, they were flush-faced and happy once more. They were a little late, which didn't bother Ellie and Brenda, for it meant that they got to flounce down the entire length of the aisle to the first pew, making sure that every eye in the church was on them, and every expression of every eye a jealous one. Lord, they were disgusting. And his mother had been scared that Leslie might embarrass her. Jess hunched his shoulders and slunk into the pew after the string of womenfolk just before his dad. Church always seemed the same. Jess could tune it out the same way he tuned out school, with his body standing up and sitting down in unison with the rest of the congregation, but his mind numb and floating, not really thinking or dreaming, but at least free. Once or twice, he was aware of being on his feet, with the loud, not really tuneful singing all around him. At the edge of his consciousness, he could hear Leslie singing along, and drowsily wondered why she even bothered. The preacher had one of those tricky voices. It would buzz along for several minutes quite comfortably, and then bang, he was screaming at you. Each time Jess would jump, and it would take another couple of minutes to relax again, because he wasn't really listening to the words. The man's red face, with sweat pouring down, seemed strangely out of place in the dull sanctuary. It was like Brenda throwing a tantrum over Joyce Ann touching her lipstick. It took a while to get Ellie and Brenda pulled away from the front yard of the church. Jess and Leslie went ahead and put the girls in the back and settled down to wait. Gee, I'm really glad I came. Jess turned to Leslie in unbelief. It was better than a movie. You're kidding. No, I'm not. And she wasn't. He could tell by her face. That whole Jesus thing is really interesting, isn't it? What do you mean? All those people wanted to kill him when he hadn't done anything to hurt them. It's really a kind of a beautiful story, like Abraham Lincoln or Socrates or Aslan. It ain't beautiful, Maybelle broke in. It's scary. Nailing holes right through somebody's hand? Maybelle's right. Jess reached down into the deepest pit of his mind. It's because we're all vile sinners God made Jesus die. Do you think that's true? It's in the Bible, Leslie. She looked at him as if she were going to argue, then seemed to change her mind. It's crazy, isn't it? She shook her head. You have to believe it, but you hate it. You don't have to believe it, and you think it's beautiful. She shook her head again. It's crazy. Maybelle had her eyes all squinched, as though Leslie was some strange creature in a zoo. You gotta believe in the Bible, Leslie. Why? It was a genuine question. Leslie was not being a smart aleck. Because if you don't believe in the Bible, God'll damn you to hell when you die. Where'd you ever hear a thing like that? Leslie turned on Jess, as though she were about to accuse him of some wrong that he had done to his sister. He felt hot and caught by her voice and her words. He dropped his gaze to the gunny sack and began to fiddle with the raveled edge. That's right, ain't it, Jess? Maybelle's shrill voice demanded. Don't God damn you to hell if you don't believe in the Bible? Jess pushed his hair out of his face. I reckon. I don't believe that, Leslie said. I don't even think you've read the Bible. I've read most of it, Jess said, still fingering the sack. It's about the only book we got around our place. He looked up at Leslie and half grinned. She smiled at him. Okay. But I still don't think God goes around damning people to hell. They smiled at each other, trying to ignore Maybelle's anxious little voice. But Leslie, what if you die? What's going to happen to you if you die?